Welcome back to Watching Film. I'm Seth Varnadore. I'm joined again by a special guest this week. This week, I've got Bud Davis in with me. You've probably seen him on Twitter putting out awesome graphs and different things about Florida football, football in general. My personal favorite was the Texas A&M recruiting class and peak oil prices. That was probably my favorite one I've seen. There seems to be some correlation there.
Yeah.
I'm glad to have him on. He's going to talk. We're going to review the last season for Florida quickly and why maybe it went so poorly and kind of what happened. And then we'll talk about Louisiana's last season from an advanced stats analytics perspective. And then what Bud thinks, going forward, Napier's kind of trends, what he's going to bring to the table. And then we'll end with a little transfers and recruiting because Bud's done some really, really cool stuff in those fields. So, Bud, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So, what exactly went wrong last year for Florida?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot went wrong. And I think the number one reason you move on from Mullen is he just wasn't interested in being there. But from a team overall, I thought Florida was okay last season. We were actually pretty good and extremely unlucky. Like, you look at our how we actually performed in the game and how many games you'd expect to win that based on that. And we lost a lot of games we should have won. We lost a lot of one-score games, had a lot of just devastating turnovers and penalties, and the numbers kind of bear that out. But it was a really hard season to watch, and yeah, glad to put it on this.
Yeah, that's for sure, especially towards the end there. Yeah, early on, and we were talking before we came on. Early on, there definitely was the losses early. You could find people saying there was just a massive post-game win expectancy in Florida's favor, and they lost, and so you're like, okay, that's just unlucky. Then towards the end of the year, I think it kind of started to snowball, and maybe the motivation really went out the window. But you got some numbers from last year that we can kind of take us through, explain it a little bit, and then also give us kind of where Louisiana fit on these, so we can kind of compare and contrast Coach Mullen and Coach Napier a little bit.
All right, yeah. So the first thing I wanted to look at was just overall on the year, where did we end up in offensive and defensive expected points per play? So that's EPA. If you hear me say EPA, that's just expected points added per play. So did you get more likely to score or less likely to score on every play? And it's kind of something, if you watch football, it in your head. And expected points is just a nice number assigned to that actually can, refer to in-game points. So it's pretty intuitive. It lets us have context to a lot of these numbers, and then
Yeah, it helps put like a 5 yard gain on 3rd and 7 is not good, but a 5 yard gain on 3rd and 2 is great, right? It also gives that context for
Yeah,
game
exactly.
situation, right?
It's more than just yards. It's how important were those yards, and like you said, it just we know the difference in our head. We know that context, but now this is kind of a stat that teases that out. And then I adjust it for home field advantage and opponent quality too, so that you can kind of compare apples to apples between, programs that play lighter schedules and programs that play more difficult schedules. So this first one is looking at offense on the bottom on the x-axis and then defense on the y-axis. So you want to be in this top right. That means you've got a good offense and defense. And so Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State ended up, really the cream of the crop last year. Florida did end up in the above average offense and defensive quadrant. So that's good. We definitely weren't in that, elite just outside of the college football playoff like we were last year. We were back. We're actually right under this FSU logo, slightly above average at offense and defense. And I think for Gator fans, we hear, oh, you're above average. We're pretty good. Like, I'm not saying that was a good team that lived up to expectations. We don't think Florida should be the number 33, P5 program. We expect Florida to be up here in this upper echelon. So, make sure you kind of understand, like, if I say we're above average, it doesn't necessarily mean we met expectations.
Yes.
But we were above average in both offense and defense, which usually would be pretty good. We weren't, far away from the rest of the field. The Raging Cajuns were pretty similar, above average offense and defense, and this is opponent adjusted. So they played a pretty good schedule last year. And when we actually kind of fine tune this and look at, passing and rushing for the offense, the stats kind of bear out. We had a below average passing attack and an above average rushing attack. Again, actually pretty similar to FSU's offense in terms of overall stats. So a pretty serious regression from 2020. And then looking at ULL, they were pretty similar as well, slightly below average passing, well above average in rushing. And I think a few people have kind of talked about this, that was their identity last year on offense.
Yeah, they definitely seem to be more of a run first group, and you're kind of seeing that. You're seeing a couple offensive linemen have transferred in from there. A running back definitely seemed like it was the strength of their team last year offensively.
Yeah. So by far they were much better at rushing than passing. And they leaned on that. So, we'll look at some stats later about, what was their rushing rate. But, just remember that was what they did well. On the defensive side of the ball, Florida, above average passing defense, actually pretty decent passing defense last year. I know a lot of people were frustrated just with our defense overall, but the passing defense side was, actually pretty okay. The run defense side was pretty below average. Especially for a Florida defense that should have been pretty good. We talk about what went wrong last year. I think one thing that, maybe we don't talk about enough is, losing Ventrell Miller to injury what really hurt us because James Houston had transferred. And so that middle linebacker spot, just being thin there. And then you get kind of guys, like Diabate who have to kind of take over that role, and it's not really their natural spot. And they, they weren't projected to be in that 1 and 2. And now all of a sudden they're who we're having to rely on. And I think we really got gashed there. On the Louisiana,
they still have. I don't think they stopped the counter yet.
No. And,
so
I put out some graphics like midway through the year that, it really was something Todd Grantham just struggles to defend the counter. And power, just any of those pulling plays, he just really struggled with his defense to do well against. And it has been something that's been consistent in his time at Florida. He struggled against.
Yeah, you could see it last year against Texas A&M when I think it was their first drive out of the half. They just ran the ball down Florida's throat. It was a lot of counter and pulling guys.
Yeah.
Didn't know how to take it on. And then you're hoping, maybe they'll fix that in the offseason. They got more practice time. They got spring football.
Yeah. And I don't know if
didn't change.
No, and I don't know if that's, if we had Miller, if we had Houston, either of those guys, if that would have been necessarily a big difference. But yeah, definitely below average and below expectations on that side of the ball.
Yes.
Looking at the Raging Cajuns defense, Tony has a very effective pass defense, one of the best in the G5, well above average, and then right about average, slightly below average run defense. And we'll kind of talk about this a little bit later. He plays a little bit lighter. He says, we're going to take away the big explosive plays through the air. At least that's how his defense has performed. It takes away the passing game first and gives up a little bit more on the rushing game. But really, you're not giving up a ton, just about average, slightly below against the rushing defense.
And in terms of just efficiency, if you can force people to run more, that will make your defense more efficient, won't it? That's kind of like you'd rather people run the ball a little bit more nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard for teams to run, a lot of, if you can limit explosive plays and particularly explosive pass plays, it's hard for teams to score. To put together long drives on you. Those don't happen that much. When they do happen, they are a pain to watch your defense just get run over. Florida fans, we know this, but they just don't happen that much in football across the board. Yeah. When we talk about kind of what went wrong last year, we showed you some stats that was like, all right, Florida was, above average. Well, we lost a bunch of games. Talking about, why, what really went wrong. If our offense and defense were pretty good, why did we, drop a bunch of games that we should have won? And this is a graphic from Robert Binion, who's at Robert_Binion on Twitter. And I really like this one. You see the outliers, and Florida lost more expected points by penalties, special teams, and turnovers than any other team in college football last year. The Raging Cajuns were roughly average. Georgia, slightly luckier than average. Iowa, especially lucky. Not necessarily that these are all luck. Penalties, maybe that's some discipline.
Yeah.
Special teams, people have been complaining about Florida's special teams for a while. And turnovers, but Florida was generally unlucky with a fair bit of those. And I think this plays it out. We might have been good on the average pass play, but then we would have a back-breaking penalty, or our offense might be an above average rushing offense, but then we'd have one pass that goes for a pick six. So just adding context to your penalties, special teams, and turnovers, when you add that EPA context for how bad it hurt you, no team last year got hurt more by those three phases of the game, special team, penalties, and turnovers, than Florida.
And this is something that I think you can – turnovers are, I think, and I'm sure they're a little more random, right, than just – I think you can have some effect. You can be better at protecting the ball and try to put an emphasis on taking away the ball, but there is still some randomness to turnovers, right? But penalties and special teams are seemingly things that are in your control a lot more. So improvement in those areas could lead to improvement in the one-loss record, and that should be something just from hearing Napier speak. They seem to be going to be putting an emphasis on all three of these areas.
Yeah.
I heard him talk yesterday. He talked about they want to own the ball on offense and attack the ball on defense. That was just purely turnover margin, and they've been really good since he's been at Louisiana. There is a luck component to that, but they've been really good at it. And then special teams, they put an emphasis on that, and penalties. That if you just clean some of those up, like I know Florida fans remember the Kentucky game last year. How many pre-snap penalties?
Oh yeah,
and that really took you out of that game. So if you can clean those things up, there's definitely you can just see some improvement just by being average there.
Right. And one thing you can look at. So this is from Parker at Stats of War on Twitter. So this is looking at, when we add EPA's context and compare it to your opponents in each game, if you generate more expected points than your opponent, you're expected to win more games. Georgia, led the country in it last year. Kansas and UConn on the opposite side were worse than anybody. When you look at Florida, we actually end up on the positive side, but, we didn't lose a crazy amount of games. We probably lost one or two games that we should have won. Expected win percentage looks like it's somewhere around 70%, maybe 55 in that range, versus the Ragin' Cajuns. They might have overperformed a little bit and gotten a little bit extra win percentage. So, that might be falling out from things like really messing up those phases of the game, and, the average play we did pretty well on, but then we just had these unlucky situations where we blew games. And this is from Kelly Ford, so at K Ford Rankings on Twitter. One-score games are usually a coin flip. If they had gone the other way, where would we probably have ended up ranked, based on our win-loss and who we beat? And Florida would have ended up probably a top 10 team, so 9-3. Just if you take out those one-score games where we had these stupid mistakes, we probably don't end up in the college football playoffs, but we probably end up, a top 10 team in a pretty good one. And it's just crazy just to think about how different this season could have been. And, I don't think Florida was a top 10 team at the end of last season, right?
No.
I think we saw a lot of issues with our staff, with our, players' commitment, our organization as a whole. But, just having this context that last year, we probably lost 3 games solidly, but, there were 3 other games where just bad timing and mistakes and funky things that, maybe Florida should have won that game. So it's an interesting story thinking about, what 2021 could have looked like and how it could have been a bit different.
And Florida fans, it could always be worse. It could be Nebraska fans.
Oh, yeah. They have 8 wins that could have gone the other way. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So now kind of hopping over to some stats to get an idea of, what Florida and Louisiana might have looked like. This is another one from Robert Binion on Twitter. Kind of tough to see, but one thing that, in the NFL, you see a lot of teams find success by passing on first down. So, if you pass more on first down, you generally do better in the NFL. That doesn't necessarily hold up at the college level. There's really no correlation between being a pass first down team and a run first down team and winning and generating more expected points. But we do see Florida right below the Notre Dame graphic and Louisiana right below the Kentucky graphic. They were about average in how much they passed on first down, and they were slightly above average in how much expected points they added. So maybe they leaned on their run a little bit more, but they get more EPA on first down. So, we're not necessarily seeing anything crazy with Napier's play calling here. He's not out on the ends like the service academies or the Mike Leach, the air raid. He was pretty much par for the course in terms of how often he called runs on first down. And first downs are interesting for looking at this because this is really where people break tendencies. And it's 1st and 10, the playbook's wide open, and he's got roughly a 40% run rate, 45% run rate. Florida was right around 45, 42. So pretty much in line with everybody else. Shifting over to, just early downs. This is looking at something similar. So this is, yards per rush on early downs. This is from Stats of War. Raging Cajuns, number 16 in the country in getting yards on early down runs. So they had a really effective early down run game. Florida wasn't too far behind them, getting 5.9. So this is where, when we talk about Florida's offense wasn't bad last year, right? We did a decent job of getting in front of the sticks. Our problem was, we would throw it to pick just at the worst absolute times. We were ahead of Georgia in how good we ran on early downs, which is pretty crazy.
It seemed that when you go back and think about the earlier graphic you showed about penalties and turnovers, that was really the big downfall of the offense, especially kind of in the first half or a little bit longer of the season. They were generating yards. Dan Mullen famously said that Florida had more yards than Kentucky and that loss, but they were moving the ball a lot and then would just shoot themselves in the foot in various ways. So this kind of does back that up, but it is good to see Louisiana, if you do want to be a run heavy team, at least you're successful at it.
Yeah, they were, definitely one of the best in the country last year.
This isn't just banging your head against the wall because you want to run the football. You're good at it, so you lean on it. So.
Right. They were also one of the best teams when other teams ran against them on early downs. They actually had a really effective, run defense, top 25 in the country. So, they were pretty good about being run first and limiting other teams. So this is the defensive side of the ball. And they were number 22 in the country. So that's pretty solid.
Yeah. And why this is so important too, I think, is I've heard Mike Elko, who was the D coordinator at Texas A&M, now is the head coach at Duke, I believe. They were really good on third downs, and somebody asked him, "Why are you guys so good on third downs?" He said, "Well, he game plans. He doesn't just focus specifically on third downs. He's big on, if I can get, limit the yardage on first down, that's going to help me immensely on third down."
Yeah.
So he viewed every down as being really important, first down especially, because then you can start to limit the playbook. If it's second and long, well, now, how often do they practice second and long stuff? How many plays do they have for second and long? So being really good on first down can really help you on third down, which is where Florida has struggled at times in the past.
Yeah. Kind of shifting to, the offensive side of the ball. This was a little bit on looking at, just kind of where we could expect Emory Jones next year. So this is kind of taking out how bad the throws were, right? So, Emory Jones threw a lot of really bad picks. If you look at his EPA, not a great quarterback. But if you look at completion percentage over expected, so this is just saying, guys have a higher completion percentage on 1st and 10 than they do on 3rd and long, just because the defense on 3rd and long kind of knows your options are probably just to pass or maybe run a draw or a screen.
Mm-hmm.
So players tend to have lower completion percentages then. So taking that context into account, where did Emory Jones look? And he was about average in terms of his depth of target, but then he was above average in his completion percentage. Was a decent QB, definitely not, blowing the lids off the stats like Kyle Trask, but And not a Heisman candidate, but he's not one of the worst ones in the P5 or anything like that.
No.
So I think that's interesting. I think last year, to me, we probably saw closer to Emory Jones' floor than his ceiling. And, again, I'm not necessarily trying to get into the should we have played Anthony Richardson over Emory Jones. Anthony Richardson kind of suffers from the same stats as Emory Jones. When you look at their EPA per play, they're not great because they had such costly turnovers. So you got to kind of tease out that a little bit. When we look at Levi Lewis, they were really limited at quarterback last year on the Raging Cajuns. Really low average depth of target and really low completion percentage over expected. So he was not as good of a quarterback as Emory Jones, especially when you take these situational completion percentages into account. And that's not necessarily saying, this isn't looking at what these guys did with their legs, and it's definitely not looking at the impact of turnovers here. But, just kind of take this into account when we look at these Raging Cajun stats that they were limited by their quarterback play. And I think the numbers back that up.
Yeah, and I heard Napier speak at a coach's clinic yesterday, and he talked about he talked about Levi Lewis from a perspective of that he was really good at limiting turnovers because he understood what was going on, and he was really had a high football IQ, was a student in the game, but he did talk about his physical limitations. He's like, he's probably 5'8 3/4, 180 pounds. He's like, but he won a lot of games because he went through the program, he knew what he was doing, and he was really tough.
Yeah.
So this kind of bears out, they're not slinging the ball a ton down the field. You see the average depth of target isn't really high, and maybe it's like the completion percentage over expectations lower, but when you kind of look at it in the context of the whole thing, and they're able to win games because he understood what was going on. And if you can kind of bring that coaching to some of the guys Florida has, like an Anthony Richardson, you're hoping that kind of takes him to the next level.
Yeah. And I mean, you just think of the number of games they won with a quarterback who was about as good as UMass's quarterback.
Yeah.
And that's pretty impressive. And that's pretty cool. One thing that, I really like to look at is, and it's kind of tough to see on this graphic, is, Dan Mullen kind of lost some of that aggressiveness that I would really expected from him more. Going for it on fourth down, we did not see him go for it as often as he should have in 2021. So this
was he better than that the previous year?
Yeah,
it seemed like he was a lot more aggressive in 2020, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's been one of the more aggressive coaches usually, and then 2021 took a huge step back. And so this is on fourth down, when there's a fourth down situation where your win probability is going to go up by more than 1.5% if you go for it. Dan Mullen went for it, roughly only 50% of the time. So, 50% of the time he made the wrong decision here. Compared to Baylor was almost near 100%. Kentucky, almost at 90%. And this makes a difference in these games. This really does add up. And, the Raging Cajuns, they were about 65%. So, about 15% higher. And I think, 15%, is actually a pretty big difference. If you're going for it more often than not, that's what I really like to see. And, I'm hoping we see that continue, with Napier and really kind of push us into this upper echelon where more often than not, we're making that right decision and being willing to play a little bit riskier than being conservative and trying to rely on the special teams. And especially when, you don't have that great special teams. We don't have McPherson back there anymore.
Yeah. He spoke yesterday about aggressiveness, and that's going to be one of the hallmarks is aggressive in terms of scheme and decision-making. He also spoke about his first year at Louisiana, he thought he was pretty bad at it, at these kind of decisions. And he started talking to different analytics and advanced stats firms. He said he speaks with 3 of them. He mentioned that last week he was in a 3-hour meeting with them trying to learn, where can he find an edge. So I think he's going to try to be more on the leading edge of this stuff, which is kind of what you want to see. You maximize your chance of winning by making good decisions.
Yeah. And so this is another way to look at it. So the previous one was how often did you make the decision? And then this said, okay, if you made the wrong decision, how wrong was it? So how much win probability did you lose by kicking field goals in go for it in fourth downs when you should have gone for it? And the Raging Cajuns, on the pretty far end of the G5, they did not lose that much win probability, only about 12%, 13%. That's still actually a fair bit of win probability. That's like a 70-yard pass, right? So that's a pretty big. This could be a play that changes a game, over the course of a season. That's how much you gave up by being conservative. You look at Florida. We're upwards of 25%. So basically twice as bad. And so this is just how bad of decisions were they, and they were pretty bad sometimes. And these definitely cost you games.
Is there context for like game situation? Like maybe if you're leading and there's a 4th and 1, you could go for it, increase your, or is that the win is that, or I guess it would be, right? Because it's kind of win probability, right?
Yeah. So it's all contextual. So if you're up big and
don't change it very much.
It's right? Like your win probability is at 99%, and you don't make the right, and there's probably not much difference between kicking a field goal and going for it. It probably wouldn't even get added to this situation where it's a 1.5% swing, in the different decisions.
So this is totally contextualized too.
Yeah, it does have context. It does have context. So it's taking into account the time of the game, the score of the game. I don't think Jared's. Yeah, this is from @Jared Lee, and he has the fourth down bot that you'll see for college sports that tweets out all these fourth down decisions. I don't think he has in how good you've done earlier in the game in similar situations. So, but I don't know one way or the other.
I'd imagine if you're winning by a decent bit, it may change it from 99.9 to 99.92 or something. So it's maybe not statistically significant.
Yeah.
Whether you go. So
yeah, it has how much you're leading by, field position, time on the clock. How likely are you to make the field goal versus how likely are you in a similar situation to convert a 3rd or a 1 or a 4th and 1. Yeah, so it's pretty contextualized. All right, kind of just, I think I had a couple more. This is from Swamp Stats, so @Swamp Stats on Twitter. This is looking at success rate, so how often did you generate a positive play, rushing or passing? And, our offenses kind of shows that our passing was a little worse than Louisiana's, but our run game was maybe a little bit better than theirs. Had Dameon Pierce to lean on. And this is over these were over 4
This is 2018.
Yeah. So one thing that I liked about these graphics is it just showed the consistency in the Raging Cajuns offense. They stayed in this upper right, good at passing, good at rushing quadrant over the past 4 years, where you'll see Florida bounce around. We had some years where we were much better at passing than running. Other years where we could only pass, we couldn't run as well. And, the Raging Cajuns just were very consistent in what they found success doing. And so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it's good to be good at both.
Yeah. And all of this while not having Kyle Trask at quarterback, right? Or Dameon Pierce in the backfield.
Yes,
so I thought that was interesting. I like seeing this consistency. I think the last things, this was how well they did in the red zone, how often they got to the red zone. And, the Raging Cajuns were one of the best in the country, actually, in getting their drives to the red zone, which is pretty interesting. Florida was about average. We were a little bit better in getting points per red zone drive, whereas they were about average in coming away with points in the red zone.
They were terrible at kicking field goals, if I recall correctly, right?
Yeah, that might have a lot to do with it.
They were really bad. But that's interesting that they are kind of one of the ones that getting into the red zone. Napier, again, I heard him speak. He was talking about the field zones, different field zones. And basically he calls from the kick where his kicker can make it, the kick line to the red zone. He calls that, I think, the fringe area or something like that. And he spoke about being really good on what he calls 4-point plays, and he stole that from Bill Belichick. That's where if I convert here, I get a first down and I'm pushing the ball closer to the red zone. If I don't convert, I got to kick a field goal and settle for 3 points. And he was really big on you're going to get beat if you consistently settle for field goals.
Yeah.
When you get down there. So it's that kind of ties in with how good they were to getting into the red zone.
Yeah.
I know some of their efficiency went down because they did eventually have to settle for field goals and miss some. But the fact that they're able, he was kind of, he knew it was kind of important that if I have a chance to continue a drive to score a touchdown, that's worth more to me than settling for a field goal way back here from, a 40-yard field goal. So that kind of back that up, that they got a bunch of drives into the red zone.
Yeah. All right. So then these last two are kind of looking at defense, and these are from that previous graph was from College Football Numbers at College Football Numbers on Twitter. And he puts out a lot of great stuff, and I like working with him a lot. So these last ones I kind of wanted to look at, and this was interesting to me, was, how often do teams, on the average play, how many rushers do they send? And then on the average play, how much pressures do they, and this is on an average passing dropback, how much pressure do they send? And I thought this was pretty interesting. There really wasn't a relationship between the two, which one is interesting. You'd think that teams that send a bunch of guys and blitz more often might generate more pressure. Mm-hmm. But, across the P5, that didn't really seem to fall out. Some teams like NC State averaged less than 4 rushers per play, and they were one of the best at generating pressure last year on a drop back rate. So I thought that was really interesting. Wisconsin was pretty much average. Florida rushed fewer players than average last year and generated more pressure than average. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Georgia actually generated more pressure than us and rushed slightly more players. But, we were kind of in a similar quadrant in terms of generating pressure as, Alabama, LSU, Georgia, Oklahoma State, Baylor. Baylor on here is an interesting one to look at. They average fewer rushers, but, we're one of the higher ones in the country in terms of pressure rate. And I think with what we're going to see in Tony, we're going to see a similar defense to what it's Rob Roberts at Baylor, right?
Yeah, Ron Roberts was at Louisiana. Got hired from Louisiana. He was Napier's first DC. Got hired to Baylor. Then they elevated Tony, I think, and they're kind of from a similar tree there.
Yeah, so average probably like 4.1 rushers per play. So you're not blitzing a ton, but you're generating pressure, at 40-45%, which is higher than average. I think average is like 35%. And looking at ULL, they were a little bit more aggressive. They were closer to 4.2 rushers per play, but we're at like a 40% pressure rate, which was pretty good for the G5. And the G5, maybe a little bit more. Teams tend to rush players a little bit more and generate a little bit more pressure than their P5 peers.
Yeah, and that if you go back and watch the video I put out with had Cody Alexander come on and talk about Patrick Toney, a lot of the creeper and simulated pressure stuff that they are really good at, it involves making it look like you're bringing more than 4 sometimes and only bringing 4, or bringing 4 but not the 4 that it looks like it's going to come.
Yeah.
So you're able to generate a lot of pressure with 4, and they call those, they call them safe pressures. So you don't have to risk pass coverage to get pressure, and you can kind of see that here.
Yeah,
getting over 40% pressure on 40%.
And
plays.
we talked about it this week. I was really trying to tease out using this Sports Info Solutions. I was really trying to tease out, looking at pressure rate and creeper blitz rates and stuff like that. And I couldn't quite get it to work. And I think it's really just a charting issue. We can get some cool stuff out, to tell us about what Tony's defense looks like. So this is from 2021 ULL. Generally play two-thirds of their play. They're playing 6 men in the box.
Their base is a 4-2-5. So that tracks, right?
Yeah. And earlier this season, I looked at, kind of optimizing defenses for run and pass. You want 6 men in the box at college football. If you've got 7 in the box, you're going to be vulnerable to the pass. If you've got 5, you're going to be vulnerable to the run in terms of an expected points added per play.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got 6, you're really balanced against both. And obviously, a lot of that's going to be dictated by what the offense is doing. But it really looks like 6 men in the box is kind of what you want your base to be.
And I think you pointed out what's interesting is he's more likely to go to a lighter box than 6 than he is to go to a heavier box.
Yeah.
Which I think they really put, like you mentioned earlier, I think they put a lot of focus on not allowing explosive pass plays. So yeah, if I'm gonna put less guys in the box and make you run a little bit more, that's all right.
Yeah, they seem very comfortable going light out there. Looking at this, even those guys in the box, right? They're going to have 5 DBs on the field for almost every play.
Yep.
And even then, they're going to go lighter before they go heavier. So they might even have a dime package out there, 10% of the time. And then I like looking at this, and I think this is what made the creeper hard to tease out. The number of linebackers on the field is it's going to be 2 or 3, and the number of D linemen is going to be 3 or 4. So this is probably a little bit of charting. That out. These are kind of some of your tweener guys that sometimes might get charted as D linemen, sometimes get charted as linebackers.
That's it. This could totally be that, rush end that is standing up, but it could also drop back. So maybe he's considered a linebacker when they drop him. And then, that he just could be standing up, but he's still a defensive end. So I think you're probably right on that.
Yeah. And it could be, splitting between 3D line, 3 linebackers, or 4D linebackers and 2 linebackers.
Yeah.
It's really going to be probably 6 guys who are going to be pretty similar out there each time. Maybe one's a little bit lighter, one's a little bit heavier, based on the context. But yeah, usually between your D linemen and linebackers, there's going to be 6 of them, and 2 or 3 of them are going to be linebackers, and 3 or 4 of them are going to be D linemen. So. Yeah. And then this is what we looked at, is looking at the pass rush, rushing 4, that's 72% of the time, right? So these are the creepers, right? We're going to send 4 almost every time. Sometimes 5, sometimes 6, sometimes only 3. But virtually every time it's going to be 4, but it's going to mix up which 4 it is, because, if we've only got 3 D linemen on there, then who that 4th one could be coming from, then they've got to pick between 2 different guys. So
yeah, and the creeper is going to be a 4-man rush, but one of them is going to be a non-lineman, and one lineman is going to drop. So
yeah,
it's still a 4-man rush, but it's not the 4 conventional rushers. So that's definitely a big part of it, and you see there that and what does rushing 4 allow you to do? It allows you to be very safe and sound on the back end, and limiting explosive passing plays.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really what I wanted to show with these graphics.
Okay. I had some questions. You put out, I think it was just part 1, a really, really interesting study on the transfer portal and transfers.
Yeah.
How do you think it looked like Florida hadn't been hit as hard as some of their some opponents? I know Florida State had one of their classes was one of the hardest hits. And then Tennessee was up there as well. It seems like Florida's kind of been on the lower end in the SEC. Looks like on how the transfer portal has affected them.
Yeah, so this was a piece that I put out on College Football Numbers, looking at what are transfer rates by program. What causes people to transfer, and Florida was. We're slightly above average for FBS, which is this line here. Red are transfers, gray are in the portal. Tennessee, Auburn, Mizzou, all on the high end. Tennessee and Auburn, especially across all teams. And, I don't necessarily know if I have a preferred explanation. I do think we're going to see a higher transfer rate, as we change coaches. We've seen guys, enter the portal. This data was current as of the start of the month. We're probably, higher, probably towards the middle, in here. But I do think, overall, Florida has done a pretty good job under Dan Mullen of getting guys who want to be at Florida. And, whether that was how we recruited, We weren't going in and competing for some of these high 4-star guys who might be more likely to transfer,
Yeah.
or going after guys that are necessarily far from home. You definitely see the further distance players are from home, the more likely they are to transfer. I think we see some differences by conference. We see some differences by recruit quality. These high 4-star guys, not necessarily the most elite 5 stars, but these upper 4 stars have a really high transfer rate. That's not necessarily where Florida was making its bread and butter in recruiting. We were probably a little bit down here,
Yeah.
in the guys we were targeting.
They
So
they benefited more from those guys transferring to Florida than they did then it was detrimental because, like you said, they weren't in on a ton of those guys.
yeah, and we didn't take a bunch of huge classes. Florida's generally taken pretty average or smaller size classes and then filled from the portal. And I'm going to kind of look at that in a later article. But yeah, I thought Florida looked pretty good in here.
Do you think that where do you think though, and where do you kind of just based on the trends of what type of class or what size of class, and where do you think that in the future you'll see more guys leaving, and is that necessarily like a terrible thing? Because that
I
typically is it typically the better recruiting classes have a little bit more
Yeah.
in the
So
portal?
so bigger classes definitely have a higher transfer rate. So the more guys you have in your transfer class, you know, that's more competition for playing time, more likely that guys are going to leave. And I think really what guys transfer for is playing time and to find their right competition level. You know, guys like Justin Fields get all the attention in the portal. Those P5 to P5 transfers where guys are moving to better programs, those are the exception, not the rule. Most transfers from the P5 and G5 even are guys heading down a level to P5 players going to the G5 or even non-FBS, G5 too. The guys actually moving up, that's more rare. And so I think in a lot of ways the portal does what it's supposed to do, and it's sorting guys who might not have been sorted correctly during recruitment, and it's sorting guys who want playing time, right? It's not necessarily guys looking for NIL money. These guys just want to play football, and I think that's kind of neat is to actually see the data tease that out. Is it's not necessarily the guy who transfers who's a backup at Florida who transfers and goes to a G5 team, might not necessarily get all the, national headlines, but that's more what a typical transfer looks like is, the guy who didn't break the depth chart.
Yeah.
You look at the portal, QBs, really high transfer rate, running backs, wide receiver. We haven't recruited a lot of running backs. It's one of the positions we've been light on out of high school. Receiver similarly. And so that might play a role in why Florida's a little bit lighter on transfers compared to what you might expect. Yeah.
And they've taken at those positions they've taken transfers, so that kind of limits
Yeah.
those guys aren't going to go again. So
And I think this is one of the interesting things. This is one of my favorite conclusions that fell out of this is, you see these skill position players have a higher transfer rate. That's really because they come in with body sizes and skill sets that are, excuse me, already pretty adapted to playing college football versus like D linemen, trench players. They've got to get bigger and stronger before they're really pushing for that playing time. And so they have lower transfer rates.
yeah, that's interesting. And this is over the life of the portal, correct?
Yeah, so this is the 2016 to 2021 classes. And the portal's been around since 2018.
Yeah.
And so this is their transfer rate by class. And you can see it basically right now it's peaked in 2018. And that's really just because the portal's been around for that class their whole career.
Yeah.
Really what it is you get, roughly for each recruiting class, you lose 4 to 6%. So that's you lose a player or two from every class every year.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So now let's on recruiting as a whole. I've seen you reference a few different times. Kind of there's an elite level that you have to get to in recruiting.
Yeah.
To win a championship. Florida has been below that level for the entirety of Dan Mullen's tenure, I believe.
So yeah, and it's a couple different factors that I look at. Let me pull it up real quick. I'm trying to find it.
And I know you've done projected. You were doing projected classes, right? And then even if Florida hit on every single guy they were in for, they still would have been a little bit shy of that elite level, right?
Yeah.
This past class.
Yeah, this one, this past class, it was a transfer class, so I wasn't really sweating it too hard with Napier. This isn't the class where I'm looking at him to, I'm not establishing his benchmarks in year one of the transfer class. But so when I look at recruiting, I look at a few different things. Really, what I want to see is recruiting for depth. So, over 4 years, what does your average class need to be? And then usually what you see is one of those classes in that 4-year period. So this is looking at class scores. So this is each national championship winner. These are their previous 4 classes, and then they have one best class that usually stands out from the rest. So your average class might be, a little bit lower, but you have one good class, usually one elite class. So I like to look at an average 4-year average class score around 260. So over 4 years, you need to average a top 10 class. And in that 4-year period, you need to have one class that's in like the top 5, top 6.
Okay.
So you need depth, average top 10 class, and then one of those needs to bring in elite talent. And so you need a top 5 or top 6 class in there as well. So it's a blend of both. You have to have that one, at least one of those one good classes to infuse that elite talent.
Yeah.
You can look at this in class score. You can look at it in blue chip ratio. You can look at it in average recruit rating. It kind of falls out the same. Your one best class, needs to be significantly better, top 5 or top 6, and your average class needs to be around top 10.
So what is in those terms, what is the hill Florida has to climb right now in terms of getting to that level?
Yeah,
obviously a top 5 class next year would go a long way, but would that even put them in that range?
Yeah, so heading into the 2022 class, which is over, Florida had been recruiting well at depth, but did not have the infusion of elite talent to get them there. Similar to Notre Dame. And really what we're looking for is, can Napier bring in one of these top 5, top 6 classes? And I'm not sure about that yet. I don't judge transition classes too hard. It's a weird scenario.
Yeah.
I do think we're going to see a really good class next year. We're going to have a lot of counters. He can take a big class. There's a lot of talent in state, at positions we need. And we seem to be starting off recruiting the 2023 class pretty well. If it ends up hitting that, 278 metric that I'm looking for, then I think Florida's going to be competing for a title within the next 4 years.
Okay. So that's really kind of, if they can get into that top 5 level next year, they're kind of that shows you that he's ready to kind of compete at a national level now.
Yeah, he doesn't have to do that next year, right? Next year he could put up, a top 8, top 9, right? We need to be top 10 next year. We need to see that. And ideally I want to be closer to 7 than further from 7. So that's what we're looking for.
All right. So no pressure. Come in, get a top 10 class, top 5 class, and then you're on your way. There seems to be some momentum for sure, and they're definitely putting the money behind it.
Yeah, and I think our counters are there. We're probably going to end up with a class that's going to be like 25, 27 guys. It's going to be an above average size class compared to the rest of college football. So we're going to end up with a pretty good class score. And that's where you take all these class scores with a grain of salt. They do measure talent, but they're also influenced by just the number of players as well.
All right. Well, good luck, Billy Napier.
Yeah.
He's got some work to do, but he seems to enjoy that work.
Yeah, and he's making it a priority, which we didn't necessarily see under Mullen.
No, I heard. So when you go to these coaches clinic, you'll run into people and talk to people. And I talked with a coach. I knew that had ended up hiring somebody that used to work at Florida in some capacity, right, before last year, and he basically told him, "Hey, Florida's going to be terrible next year."
Mm,
And he's like, "Well," and talking about the 2021 season, he's like, "Why is that?" He's like, we didn't recruit at all for 2 years."
mm.
So I think that kind of showed up in some ways, and that was one of the reasons that Florida made the move to Napier, and he seems to definitely put a big emphasis on recruiting and going out and procuring talent. So hopefully for Florida that turns around. I think it's moving in the right direction. It seems to be, but
Yeah.
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 Well, hey, thanks for coming on. All this stuff was really awesome. I found it really interesting to see kind of Florida, there was a little bit of bad luck last year, but then you kind of compare them to Louisiana, and it seems like maybe Napier can come in and make some of those easier changes, like special teams and penalties, and clean that stuff up, and maybe that'll lead to a better than expected first year, which I think we probably shouldn't be expecting too much out of this first season, but
Yeah.
make up for it on the recruiting show, right?
Yeah. I'm not expecting a crazy 2022 season. Like, lower expectations is the key to happiness. And, I think it's going to be better than last year in terms of win loss and probably, just organization, just how much the players buy in. I think we'll see that a little bit better next year, at least carry throughout the season. I think we'll recruit a little bit better, but I'm not expecting us to be knocking on the college football playoff door next year. I think year 2 is when I look for good recruiting and on-field results to start trickling in.
Yeah. So hopefully he can get that stuff going off the field, but on the field, maybe make a few changes, do a little bit better than you think, but probably still going to be a few years away from that real elite level team. So, but thanks for coming on. What is your Twitter so people can follow you
Yeah.
and see all this stuff coming out in real time, like I get to see, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's been fun to talk about it. Went by fast. I'm at
Yeah.
jbuddavis on Twitter.
All right, check him out at jbuddavis on Twitter. I'll link it in the description below. Thanks again for coming on. I appreciate you giving us kind of a look at the advanced stats and analytics of Florida football and Billy Napier as well.
Cool. Thanks for having me.